The night before his final mission, the wind over the Pacific carried the scent of salt, smoke, and distant rain, as though the ocean itself were brooding over secrets men weren't meant to hear. On December 12, 1943, the moonlight fell in broken shards across the American airstrip on Bougainville, illuminating rows of fighter planes crouched on the ground like silver beasts waiting to be unleashed. The engines were quiet for now, their metal skins cooling, but the sleeping jungle hummed with restless energy. Lieutenant Daniel Mercer sat alone on an overturned crate near his P-38 Lightning and listened to the uneven rhythm of night insects echoing through the palm trees. He wasn't usually up this late before a sortie. Superstition, discipline, maybe even fear kept most pilots in their bunks. But tonight something pressed on his chest with a weight he couldn't shrug off. He glanced at the nose art painted on his aircraft. A pale white spider perched delicately beneath the canopy, its legs curling outward as if guarding him, even while grounded. The crew chief had jokingly named it White Widow after the spider's real-life cousin, but Daniel had never felt fully comfortable with that title. Something about it felt too prophetic, like a quiet reminder that death wasn't just a possibility. It was the constant passenger riding in his shadow. Still, he'd flown her through 23 combat missions, strafing barges, chasing Zeros, escorting bombers, surviving close calls that left his hands shaking long after wheels touched the runway. She had carried him through every nightmare the Pacific could conjure. Tonight, though, she looked different, almost expectant. He rubbed his eyes and leaned forward, elbows on knees. Sleep wouldn't come. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw Holt again. The explosion, the fire, is an unbearable moment when he realized his indecision had cost the crew chief his life. Holt's voice clung to the corners of Daniel's mind like a ghostly echo. Always beginning the same way, Lieutenant? You gotta trust your gut out there. And cutting off exactly where the ground crewman's life had ended in a sheet of burning fuel, no official reprimand had been filed, and command insisted it was no one's fault. But that did nothing to quiet the gnawing guilt that hollowed his chest from the inside. Footsteps approached behind him, soft but purposeful. Daniel didn't need to look up to know who it was. Captain Ellis had a way of walking like every step was a decision in itself. Heavy with responsibility, yet brisk enough to suggest he expected the world to keep pace with him. "You're doing that brooding thing again," Ellis said, his voice low but gruff, like gravel dragged across wood. Daniel sighed. "Just getting some air? In the middle of the night? Before a mission?" Ellis sat down beside him on the crate, without waiting for permission. The older pilot smelled faintly of engine oil and tobacco, as though he'd carried the war on his skin longer than anyone else in the squadron. "You're a lousy liar, Mercer." Daniel tried not to flinch at the gentle accusation. "Just restless." "You've been restless for 2 weeks," Ellis replied. "Ever since don't," Daniel whispered sharply. Ellis paused, studying the young man's tense posture. "You can't let it eat you alive. You can't fly like this. A man second-guessing himself ends up to door worse. He gets someone else killed." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know." Ellis softened slightly, leaning forward with elbows on his knees. "You're one of my best pilots, Daniel. But you've got a battlefield living in your head, and that's a dangerous place for a pilot to fight alone." The captain's voice dropped even lower. "Talk to me. Or talk to Harris. Hell, talk to the chaplain if you want. Just don't let the silence swallow you." A long breath escaped Daniel. "I made the wrong call with Holt. You know it." "I know it." "That's war," Ellis said simply. "People die because choices must be made in seconds. Holt knew the risks. We all did. That doesn't make it easier." "No," Ellis admitted. "It doesn't." The two men sat for a while, letting the night fill the space between their words. Waves crashed distantly against the shore, a dull and rhythmic pulse like the beating of a massive heart. Somewhere near the perimeter, a Marine shouted orders during a late-night drill, and the jungle responded with the screech of a startled bird. Nothing was still in the Pacific X, the men forced to spend too much time with their own thoughts. Finally, Ellis stood and patted Daniel's shoulder. "We launch at 0600. Recon says a Japanese convoy is heading toward Rabaul with supplies they desperately want. If those ships reach the harbor intact, we'll be seeing the consequences for months." Daniel nodded, though the words felt far away. "I'll be ready." "Better be," Ellis said with a faint smirk. "Harris will be your wing again. Keep him alive, will you? Kid's too young to die and too damn cheerful to be allowed the satisfaction." Daniel couldn't help but chuckle a little. "I'll try." Ellis gave one last reassuring nod. "Get some sleep, Lieutenant." "That's an order." Daniel remained seated long after the captain walked away. The moon drifted behind a curtain of clouds, leaving him in silver darkness. Eventually, he stood and touched White Widow one last time before heading to his tent. Whispering a quiet promise to Holt, he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to keep. At dawn, the air was thick with humidity and nerves. Engines roared awake along the runway as the P-38 Lightnings prepared for takeoff. Daniel climbed into the cockpit of his aircraft while mechanics made final adjustments below. Harris jogged up and slapped the side of the plane before Daniel sealed the canopy. "Morning, Lieutenant." The young pilot grinned through the glass. "Hell of a day to blow up some ships, isn't it?" "You say that about every day," Daniel replied over the intercom as Harris climbed into his own fighter. "That's because every day is a hell of a day to blow up some ships." Daniel shook his head, but the familiar voice eased something sharp inside him. The squadron rolled down the runway seconds later, engines screaming as they lifted into the morning light. The jungle shrank beneath them, the smell of earth and salt dissolving into the upper air. Harris slid into formation at Daniel's right wing, tapping twice on his canopy in a gesture that meant, "I've got your back." Daniel tapped his own canopy in return. "Let's hope I've got my own too." The squadron climbed to cruising altitude, and the vast Pacific opened before them, a shimmering blue world stretching to infinity. As empty as the sky and yet filled with invisible dangers, Daniel exhaled slowly. He didn't know then that this mission would lead him into the most harrowing fight of his life, or that it would force him to confront the one truth he feared above all others. He only knew that the war was still raging, and he had a part to play. The early morning sun rose behind them in muted shades of gold and crimson, painting the clouds in long streaks that looked like ribbons torn from the sky. Daniel kept his hands steady on the controls as White Widow sliced through the humid air. The high whine of the twin Allison engines was both comforting and unnerving comforting because they were powerful. Reliable things, but unnerving because Daniel knew what would happen if one of them sputtered or failed at the wrong moment. The P-38 was a beast of a machine, fast and deadly, but only as safe as the sky allowed it to be. Their target lay 2 hours north, a Japanese convoy steaming toward the heavily fortified Rabaul base. Recon planes had spotted at least 4 destroyers, several transports, and a small screen of escort fighters. The mission was simple on paper: swoop down, strafe the ships, cripple the convoy before it could resupply the enemy stronghold. But nothing was simple in the Pacific. Every mission was a gamble between luck, skill, and fate. Harris's voice crackled over the radio. "You know, Lieutenant, most people wake up and drink coffee. We wake up and fly into gunfire. Does that make us special or just insane?" "Quiet, Harris," Ellis growled from lead position. "Save the jokes for after we get home. Assuming you two jokers don't get yourselves shot down?" Harris snorted, though it came through as a burst of static. "Yes, sir." Daniel allowed himself a faint smile. Harris had become something of a younger brother during their deployment. The kid spoke too much, laughed too easily, and seemed immune to fear, at least when others were watching. But Daniel had seen the truth once after a bad landing. Harris trembling behind a fuel truck, trying to hide the shaking in his hands. He'd told Daniel he was fine, but Daniel recognized the look. Every pilot carried ghosts. Some just hid them better. The clouds thinned as they approached the expected convoy route. Sunlight glistened off the water below, turning the sea into a million scattered stars. Daniel instinctively scanned the horizon, searching for the telltale specks that suggested movement, danger, or death. He had done this so many times that his eyes moved faster than his thoughts, assessing threats before he consciously recognized them. Every pilot developed a sixth sense or didn't live long enough to gain one. Ellis's voice broke the silence, eyes sharp. "We should be hitting their patrol line any minute now." Daniel checked his gauges, then looked over at Harris. The younger pilot was holding formation well, jaw set, eyes flicking between his instruments and the world ahead. It was one thing Daniel admired about him beneath the chatter. Harris was disciplined where it mattered. Minutes stretched like hours. The squadron banked east, then back north, weaving through thin cloud layers until Ellis finally muttered, "There, 11 o'clock low." Daniel spotted them immediately, dark shapes moving slowly across the waves. Smoke rising from funnels, white wakes trailing behind them. A nervous heat crept into his chest. The convoy looks like 4 destroyers. 2 troop transports and a tanker, Ellis said. More than recon expected. And I count at least a dozen Zeros circling overhead. Harris let out a low whistle. Well, hell. Ellis took a breath. We take out the ships first. Corsairs from the next group will sweep the fighters. But until then, expect company. The squadron descended into attack formation, engines screaming as they dove through a cloud layer thick as wool. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. This part the approach always felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. He remembered Holt's last words again, echoing in the hollow place inside him. You gotta trust your gut out there. He swallowed hard. I'll try. Tracer fire erupted from the lead destroyer as soon as the lightnings broke through the clouds. Orange bursts streaked upward like fiery spears. Daniel banked left, narrowly avoiding a burst of flak that exploded too close for comfort. The air filled with the roar of engines, the rattling of gunfire, shouted warnings over the radio. Ellis led the first pass, his guns blazing. Target the transports. Sink those, and the whole mission's worth it. Daniel dove low, skimming just above the waves. Gunfire hammered from beneath him, the destroyer's deck erupting with muzzle flashes. He lined up the nearest transport ship, teeth clenched, and squeezed the trigger. His cannons barked fire, rounds tearing across the ship's hull. Wood shattered. Metal ripped. Smoke billowed upward. Daniel pulled back sharply before slamming into the mast. Behind him, Harris whooped. Nice hit, Mercer. I think you scared the hell out of them. Focus! Daniel barked. But even he couldn't fully hide the tight. Satisfaction burning in his chest. Zeros screamed down from above like white sharks scenting blood. Their engines wailed as they descended toward the lightnings. One fighter latched onto Ellis's tail almost immediately. I've got a bogey on me, Ellis shouted. Daniel reacted before thinking. He rolled, banked hard, and climbed behind the Zero, the world spinning around him in a blur of blue and smoke. Captain, brake left on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Now, Ellis snapped left. Daniel fired. The Zero burst into flames, spiraling into the sea. Nice work, Mercer. Ellis yelled, but Daniel didn't feel triumph. Holt's ghost stirred again, whispering from the shadows of memory, reminding him how quickly a good call could turn deadly. Before Daniel could respond, Harris's voice screamed through the radio. I've got 2 on me. Daniel twisted his head. Harris was swerving desperately to shake off a pair of Zeros glued to his tail. One fired and clipped Harris's left wingtip, sending sparks across the sky. Harris, climb and roll. Daniel shouted, I'm trying. Brake toward me. The young pilot obeyed. Daniel dove, pulling the P-38 into a sharp intercept angle. He fired a burst that forced one Zero to peel off. The second stayed locked on Harris. Come on, come on. Daniel muttered through clenched teeth as he adjusted his aim, fighting turbulence, smoke, and the burning sting of sweat in his eyes. Then he fired. The bullets missed. Not by much. But enough. Holt's ghost shrieked through his mind. You hesitated. Daniel fired again, furious at himself. This time the rounds connected. The Zero exploded into a fireball. Harris climbed upward, panting, shaken. Thanks, Lieutenant. You okay? Still flying, so. Yeah, Daniel exhaled shakily, though the knot in his stomach tightened instead of loosening. He had nearly been too slow. Again, just like Holt, just like before. The sky was chaos now. Planes twisted and dove in deadly spirals, tracer fire weaving bright threads through the air. Ships below fired blindly at anything with wings. The ocean churned with wreckage and flames. Ellis's voice called out over the radio, "All business. One more pass. Take out that tanker." Daniel banked toward the target. Harris followed close behind, still rattled but flying steady. They lined up. Engines howled. The tanker loomed large. Daniel aimed when suddenly a shadow streaked across his canopy. A-0. Point blank. Coming straight for him. The enemy pilot fired first. Rounds peppered White Widow's right. Boom. Warning lights flared on Daniel's dashboard. He cursed and yanked the stick left. But the Zero stayed with him, a ghostly silhouette dancing on his wing. "Mercer," Harris screamed. "He's on you." Daniel didn't answer. Fear froze his throat. He could almost hear Holt, "Now trust your gut. Stop hesitating. Stop doubting." In that moment, Daniel made a choice. Not the safe choice. Not the rational one. The instinctive one. He cut throttle, letting the P-38 jerk suddenly downward. The Zero overshot. Daniel fired. The enemy fighter exploded so close to the heat, washed across his canopy like breath from a furnace. "Holy hell," Harris gasped. Ellis barked a laugh through the static. "That's what I like to see." But Daniel didn't laugh. His hands were shaking too hard. Below them, the tanker was burning. Transport ships were sinking. The mission was working, but the battle was far from over.
The sky seethed like a living thing, alive with fire and smoke and metal screaming through the air. Daniel felt the sting of adrenaline sharpen every sound, the clatter of his rattling instrument panel, the throaty roar of his engines under strain, the bursts of flak punching holes through the clouds like angry fists. He leveled out after his kill and scanned for Harris, relief washing through him as he spotted the younger pilot circling back into formation, wings trembling, but intact. Daniel gave a brief, wordless nod, then turned his attention back to the convoy, though something inside him still trembled with the aftershock of that near-fatal moment. He had trusted his instinct at last, acted without fear, and saved his life. The victory was real but fragile, like something that might slip from his hands if he exhaled too hard. Ellis's voice crackled urgently over the radio. "Squadron, listen up. We've got incoming. More fighters from the north. Looks like a whole swarm of them." Daniel squinted at the horizon. Tiny specks rapidly grew into dark, fast-moving flecks. Japanese reinforcements, dozens of them, descending like a storm of wasps. The convoy had cried for help, and the sky had answered in force. Daniel's stomach clenched. Their own fighter cover was still miles away. They were outnumbered, and their ammunition was running low after 2 brutal strafing runs. He hesitated for half a breath, wondering if they should disengage, return home, regroup, wait for support. Then he heard Holt again, that fractured, ghostly memory whispering in his mind, "You can't freeze. Not now." Daniel tightened his grip on the stick, no hesitation. "Captain, we can't take them head on. Suggest we drag them south, toward the cloud bank." Ellis cursed softly, but not at Daniel. "You heard him, boys. Follow Mercer. We'll pull him into the clouds and pick our fights." The order spread quickly. The P-38s banked hard, engines howling as they surged toward a dense line of white clouds sweeping in from the southeast. The approaching Zeros accelerated, their engines shrieking as they dove after the Americans. Daniel threw a quick look back. 24 of them, maybe more, enough to tear through the squadron if they stayed in open sky. As they reached the outer wall of the cloud bank, a Zero fired a burst that stitched across Daniel's right wing, jolting the aircraft with a violent shudder. He gritted his teeth, hauled the P-38 into a steep climb, and plunged into the cloud layer. Instantly the world dissolved into thick, white nothingness. His vision vanished. Moisture coated the glass. The radio filled with chaotic screams and warnings from half the squadron. "Break! Break! I can't see! On my 6! He's on my—" A sudden explosion boomed somewhere close, followed by a fading scream cut off by static. Daniel's pulse spiked as the whiteness swallowed everything. His only guides were the artificial horizon, altimeter, and the throbbing instinct that told him danger lurked inches away. Flying blind was terrifying. Flying blind with enemies in pursuit was worse. "Harris, sound off," Daniel demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm here. but I lost you in the soup. Stay steady. Keep your wings level. What about the Zeros? They'll lose sight of us too, Daniel said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. A shape flickered in the whiteness, fleeting but unmistakable. A plane, too small to be American. Daniel banked instinctively, and a burst of bullets ripped through where he'd been a heartbeat earlier. He spun into the murk, feeling the G-force crush into his ribs. The P-38 groaned under the strain. Daniel leveled out, breath heaving, searching desperately for a clearer view. The moment the cloud thinned, he glimpsed the enemy fighter emerging beside him like a ghost with teeth. He squeezed the trigger. His rounds tore into the Zero's cockpit, sending it spiraling into the fog. Daniel couldn't even see its fall, only heard the muted thump of an explosion far below. The cloud bank finally began to thin, and they burst into open sky again, the sudden sunlight almost blinding after the suffocating white. Far below, the ocean glittered, innocent and unaware of the carnage taking place above it. Daniel shook his head to clear the fog of panic and scanned urgently for Harris. He spotted him to the left, a Zero glued to his tail. "Harris, dive!" Daniel shouted. "I can't shake him!" Daniel rolled into a dive, engines screaming, airspeed climbing dangerously as he aimed straight for the Zero stalking his wingman. The enemy pilot noticed too late. Daniel fired a long burst that shredded the Zero's engine. Flames erupted and the plane nosedived into the sea. "Got him," Daniel breathed. Harris's voice broke with relief. "God, thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant." "Don't thank me yet. We're not done." More Zeros broke through the clouds, spreading out to search for targets. Ellis regrouped the surviving P-38s, though the squadron was visibly smaller now. Smoke trails marked the sky where several of their own had fallen. Daniel tried not to look at them. He couldn't look at them. Ellis's voice steadied with command. "We can't win a prolonged fight, not with this many. Stick close, keep speed high, stay defensive until our Corsair boys arrive." As if summoned by his words, distant engine roars grew louder. Daniel's heart leapt when he saw them, F-4U Corsairs, sweeping down from the southern sky like dark, bent-winged angels. They dove into the swarm of Zeros with brutal efficiency, guns blazing. The sky erupted anew as friendlies clashed with the remaining fighters. With the pressure relieved, Daniel and Harris rejoined Ellis and targeted the last intact transport below. The Japanese destroyers, battered but not broken, still poured fire upward, but their aim had faltered. Smoke choked the air and half the convoy already listed or burned. "Mercer, Harris, you're with me. One last pass. After this, we're pulling out." They descended together, weaving through the curtain of flak. The transport loomed large, desperate to escape but fatally slow. Daniel lined up his shot, steadied his breathing, and fired. His cannons thundered. The deck erupted. Flames raced across the spine. Ellis strafed next, splitting the hull. Harris finished it. The ship cracked, folded, and disappeared into the boiling sea. The convoy was broken, mission accomplished. But as Daniel pulled up from the run, a burst of flak tore through the underside of White Widow. The cockpit rattled violently. Warning lights blazed across the panel. The right engine sputtered, coughed, then died. "Mercer!" Harris screamed. "Your engine!" "I know," Daniel snapped, fighting to keep the aircraft steady. The P-38 lurched, one engine dead, the other laboring. Losing an engine in combat was close to a death sentence. The Lightning wasn't built to be graceful on one. Ellis's voice sharpened. "Mercer, bail out if you have to. Don't be a hero." Daniel refused. "Not here. Not now." "I'm going to try to limp home," he growled, though doubt gnawed at him. Smoke billowed behind White Widow. The propeller on his right boom was frozen like a silver blade in the sun. "Daniel," Harris said quietly, dropping rank for the first time, "please don't make me watch you go down." Daniel didn't answer. He turned the wounded Lightning toward Bougainville and began the slow, painful climb. The battle raged behind him, but Daniel didn't look back. He didn't dare to.
The sky behind Daniel burned like the mouth of some vast furnace, spewing smoke and fire into the humid air as the remnants of the battle dwindled. The roar of combat faded slowly, replaced by the trembling hum of White Widow's single surviving engine. The aircraft vibrated violently, as though struggling to hold itself together by pure force of will. Daniel gripped the controls hard enough for his knuckles to blanch, jaw clenched against the fear rising like bile in his throat. The P-38 wasn't meant to fly gracefully on one engine, not with one entire boom shuddering, not with the drag pulling her sideways, not with the weight of his own guilt pressing into his spine. Harris's voice cut through the static, brittle but steady. "I'm sticking with you, Lieutenant. I'll guide you home." "No," Daniel said, breath unsteady. "Go back. Help Ellis finish the fight." "Fight's almost over anyway," Harris insisted. "You need a wingman." Daniel shook his head, even though Harris couldn't see. "I don't want you getting dragged down with me." "That's not your call," Harris snapped, uncharacteristically harsh. Then softer, "You've pulled me out of the fire twice today. I'm not leaving you now." A tremor threatened Daniel's composure. He swallowed hard and said nothing. There was no energy left to argue. The battle was indeed winding down. Through the smoke he glimpsed Corsairs carving into the last pockets of Zeros, their arcs graceful and brutal all at once. Ellis's voice finally came through, ragged but triumphant. "Convoy destroyed, enemy fighters dispersing, pulling out. Mercer, Harris, get home, both of you." Daniel forced out a breath. "Copy that." The journey back seemed impossibly long. Every second was a negotiation between man and machine. The wounded Lightning yawed sharply whenever Daniel eased up on the rudder. The surviving engine overheated if he pushed too hard. Sweat pooled beneath his flight helmet despite the rushing air seeping through the damaged fuselage. The ocean stretched below him, endless, merciless. It felt like a mirror of his own fear, wide, deep, and cold. He tried not to think about Holt, but the memory slipped through anyway. The explosion, the fireball, the screen he never heard but always imagined. Daniel blinked hard, vision blurring, and focused on the horizon instead. If he let the memories take hold, he would lose the present, and losing the present meant dying. Harris's voice cut through the static, brittle but steady. "I'm sticking with you, Lieutenant. I'll guide you home." "No," Daniel said, breath unsteady. "Go back. Help Ellis finish the fight." "Fight's almost over anyway," Harris insisted. "You need a wingman." Daniel shook his head, even though Harris couldn't see. "I don't want you getting dragged down with me." "That's not your call," Harris snapped, uncharacteristically harsh. Then softer, "You've pulled me out of the fire twice today. I'm not leaving you now." A tremor threatened Daniel's composure. He swallowed hard and said nothing. There was no energy left to argue. The battle was indeed winding down. Through the smoke, he glimpsed Corsairs carving into the last pockets of Zeros, their arcs graceful and brutal all at once. Ellis's voice finally came through, ragged but triumphant. "Convoy destroyed, enemy fighters dispersing, pulling out. Mercer, Harris, get home, both of you." Daniel forced out a breath. "Copy that."
You said it.
The journey back seemed impossibly long. Every second was a negotiation between man and machine. The wounded Lightning yawed sharply whenever Daniel eased up on the rudder. The surviving engine overheated if he pushed too hard. Sweat pooled beneath his flight helmet despite the rushing air seeping through the damaged fuselage. The ocean stretched below him, endless, merciless. It felt like a mirror of his own fear, wide, deep, and cold. He tried not to think about Holt, but the memory slipped through anyway. The explosion, the fireball, the scream he never heard but always imagined. Daniel blinked hard, vision blurring, and focused on the horizon instead. If he let the memories take hold, he would lose the present, and losing the present meant dying. Harris's voice cut through the static, brittle but steady. "I'm sticking with you, Lieutenant. I'll guide you home." "No," Daniel said, breath unsteady. "Go back. Help Ellis finish the fight." "Fight's almost over anyway," Harris insisted. "You need a wingman." Daniel shook his head, even though Harris couldn't see. "I don't want you getting dragged down with me." "That's not your call," Harris snapped, uncharacteristically harsh. Then softer, "You've pulled me out of the fire twice today. I'm not leaving you now." A tremor threatened Daniel's composure. He swallowed hard and said nothing. There was no energy left to argue. The battle was indeed winding down. Through the smoke, he glimpsed Corsairs carving into the last pockets of Zeros, their arcs graceful and brutal all at once. Ellis's voice finally came through, ragged but triumphant. "Convoy destroyed, enemy fighters dispersing, pulling out. Mercer, Harris, get home, both of you." Daniel forced out a breath. "Copy that." The journey back seemed impossibly long. Every second was a negotiation between man and machine. The wounded Lightning yawed sharply whenever Daniel eased up on the rudder. The surviving engine overheated if he pushed too hard. Sweat pooled beneath his flight helmet despite the rushing air seeping through the damaged fuselage. The ocean stretched below him, endless, merciless. It felt like a mirror of his own fear, wide, deep, and cold. He tried not to think about Holt, but the memory slipped through anyway. The explosion, the fireball, the scream he never heard but always imagined. Daniel blinked hard, vision blurring, and focused on the horizon instead. If he let the memories take hold, he would lose the present, and losing the present meant dying. Harris's voice cut through the static, brittle but steady. "I'm sticking with you, Lieutenant. I'll guide you home." "No," Daniel said, breath unsteady. "Go back. Help Ellis finish the fight." "Fight's almost over anyway," Harris insisted. "You need a wingman." Daniel shook his head, even though Harris couldn't see. "I don't want you getting dragged down with me." "That's not your call," Harris snapped, uncharacteristically harsh. Then softer, "You've pulled me out of the fire twice today. I'm not leaving you now." A tremor threatened Daniel's composure. He swallowed hard and said nothing. There was no energy left to argue. The battle was indeed winding down. Through the smoke he glimpsed Corsairs carving into the last pockets of Zeros, their arcs graceful and brutal all at once. Ellis's voice finally came through, ragged but triumphant. "Convoy destroyed, enemy fighters dispersing, pulling out. Mercer, Harris, get home, both of you." Daniel forced out a breath. "Copy that." The journey back seemed impossibly long. Every second was a negotiation between man and machine. The wounded Lightning yawed sharply whenever Daniel eased up on the rudder. The surviving engine overheated if he pushed too hard. Sweat pooled beneath his flight helmet, despite the rushing air seeping through the damaged fuselage. The ocean stretched below him, endless, merciless. It felt like a mirror of his own fear, wide, deep, and cold. He tried not to think about Holt, but the memory slipped through anyway. The explosion, the fireball, the scream he never heard but always imagined. Daniel blinked hard, vision blurring, and focused on the horizon instead. If he let the memories take hold, he would lose the present, and losing the present meant dying. Harris's voice cut through the static, brittle but steady. "I'm sticking with you, Lieutenant. I'll guide you home." "No," Daniel said, breath unsteady. "Go back. Help Ellis finish the fight." "Fight's almost over anyway," Harris insisted. "You need a wingman." Daniel shook his head, even though Harris couldn't see. "I don't want you getting dragged down with me." "That's not your call," Harris snapped, uncharacteristically harsh. Then softer, "You've pulled me out of the fire twice today. I'm not leaving you now." A tremor threatened Daniel's composure. He swallowed hard and said nothing. There was no energy left to argue. The battle was indeed winding down. Through the smoke, he glimpsed Corsairs carving into the last pockets of Zeros, their arcs graceful and brutal all at once. Ellis's voice finally came through, ragged but triumphant. "Convoy destroyed, enemy fighters dispersing, pulling out. Mercer, Harris, get home, both of you." Daniel forced out a breath. "Copy that." The journey back seemed impossibly long. Every second was a negotiation between man and machine. The wounded Lightning yawed sharply whenever Daniel eased up on the rudder. The surviving engine overheated if he pushed too hard. Sweat pooled beneath his flight helmet despite the rushing air seeping through the damaged fuselage. The ocean stretched below him, endless, merciless. It felt like a mirror of his own fear, wide, deep, and cold. He tried not to think about Holt, but the memory slipped through anyway. The explosion, the fireball, the scream he never heard but always imagined. Daniel blinked hard, vision blurring, and focused on the horizon instead. If he let the memories take hold, he would lose the present, and losing the present meant dying. Harris's voice cut through the static, brittle but steady. "I'm sticking with you, Lieutenant. I'll guide you home." "No," Daniel said, breath unsteady. "Go back. Help Ellis finish the fight." "Fight's almost over anyway," Harris insisted. "You need a wingman." Daniel shook his head, even though Harris couldn't see. "I don't want you getting dragged down with me." "That's not your call," Harris snapped, uncharacteristically harsh. Then softer, "You've pulled me out of the fire twice today. I'm not leaving you now." A tremor threatened Daniel's composure. He swallowed hard and said nothing. There was no energy left to argue. The battle was indeed winding down. Through the smoke, he glimpsed Corsairs carving into the last pockets of Zeros, their arcs graceful and brutal all at once. Ellis's voice finally came through, ragged but triumphant. "Convoy destroyed, enemy fighters dispersing, pulling out. Mercer, Harris, get home, both of you." Daniel forced out a breath. "Copy that." The journey back seemed impossibly long. Every second was a negotiation between man and machine. The wounded Lightning yawed sharply whenever Daniel eased up on the rudder. The surviving engine overheated if he pushed too hard.
Sweat pooled beneath his flight helmet despite the rushing air seeping through the damaged fuselage. The ocean stretched below him. Endless, merciless. It felt like a mirror of his own fear, wide, deep, and cold. He tried not to think about Holt, but the memory slipped through anyway. The explosion, the fireball, the scream he never heard but always imagined. Daniel blinked hard, vision blurring, and focused on the horizon. Instead, if he let the memories take hold, he would lose.